Hello everyone, welcome to this new episode of Ask Stago, the podcast dedicated to provide expert answers to your expert questions in hemostasis. My name is Lisa Gannon and I'm a product line manager here at Stago. To animate today's session, I'm joined again by Audrey Carlo, our scientific marketing manager. Hello Audrey.
Hello Lisa, hi everyone.
So Audrey, what's the subject of our podcast today?
So today we will follow up our podcast series on women's health, and we will be speaking to April Matera about a journey towards APS diagnosis.
Hello April.
Hi, how are you?
April, thanks so much for joining us today to share your APS story.
Of course, thank you for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about life before you started experiencing any symptoms?
Life before, I was an active, working full-time person. I have a college degree. I decided to go back to school for my master's degree. So I was doing that while working full-time to change careers. So I had a really active life. I had a couple part-time jobs. I was really social. I was a club promoter on top of everything else. So I would go out every weekend and really had a fun life. Yeah, packed all the time.
Yeah.
And how did it start? So what were the first symptoms and how did your APS diagnosis come out?
Sure. So I have a little bit of a complicated story. I got married in 2013, and when we tried to have a family, I had a little bit of trouble. And I kind of knew I might have a little trouble because I was older. I was 37 when I got married. So the first time we got pregnant naturally, I lost that baby at 7 weeks to an early miscarriage, which is pretty common at that age. And, but it was devastating for us. It was our first pregnancy. Yeah. But I did have some, indications of infertility. So we did go through an intrauterine insemination. And I got pregnant again after 3 tries. But that baby started to have growth restriction and trouble with development. And we tried everything that we could to hold on to that pregnancy. And I lost that baby at 22 weeks. That was a horrifying experience.
Oh, that's awful.
It really was. It's hard to even talk about it. It's been since 2015 when that happened.
Oh, I can imagine.
Yeah. So it was about 3 or 4 weeks after that loss. I was sitting on the couch. I think my husband might have been out hunting or something that night. And I was watching TV and my vision doubled. My eyes crossed. And it took me completely by off guard. And I was shocked and I was trying everything to get my vision to straighten out. I was covering my eyes and blinking it away. I said, wow, that was strange. And okay, let's hope that never happens again. And a couple days later, it happened again. So that was one of my first symptoms of APS, now that I'm looking back. Then I started getting things like tingling in my fingers. My hand would go numb, my extremities, my face, my tongue would go numb. It was so strange. I would wake up in the middle of the night with twisting, excruciating pains in my back that would wake me up screaming. So, obviously I started to research it and went to multiple doctors. And that's where, eventually the diagnosis came from.
And when you say there was multiple doctors, I mean, they unsuccessfully diagnosed it. Obviously, the first few you visited.
Yes, I was very concerned about the double vision. So I went to all the eye doctors, ophthalmologist, neuro-ophthalmologist. I had all tests done. And they said there was nothing wrong with my eyes. Okay, sure, there was nothing wrong. But there was something wrong in my brain, right? Because the blood wasn't flowing correctly. To a rheumatologist, I hadn't gone to a hematologist yet. And I think that was the key. The rheumatologist tested me for the antibodies for lupus. It's a very confusing test, too. The test is called lupus anticoagulant, but it's not necessarily a lupus diagnosis. So it's anticardiolipin antibodies, beta-2 glycoprotein, and the lupus anticoagulant. I was positive for all 3. But I was told by my rheumatologist, unless I had an event, I wouldn't be diagnosed. So we were essentially waiting for a blood clot.
Yeah.
Okay. And how long did it take? I mean, you were seeing multiple doctors, etc. So it must have starting
February to
months.
February. It could have been longer, but I consider myself lucky. May, June, July. February, I had the symptoms, the outward symptoms. In June 25th, I had a stroke. So once I had that stroke is when they said, now you have the diagnosis.
You're APS. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, obviously you have paid a very high toll for this delayed diagnosis. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit more on that? I mean, talking about, your journey to having your daughter and, the delay that caused.
Yeah. So there's a couple of parts to that.
Yeah.
The criteria to diagnose someone with APS is complicated. You have to have positive blood work 12 weeks apart. So regardless, you're waiting 3 months no matter what. Right? And then you also have to have either 3 miscarriages or a blood clot. So either way, you are losing a lot to get the diagnosis. And that's the criteria. But I believe that is the way it is because you can have false positives and they want to be sure before they put you on lifelong medication and treat you.
But still,
of course,
for you, it was somehow a barrier to having a timely diagnosis, meaning that you had already those 2 poor and devastating experiences with your pregnancies, and then you had to wait for having this stroke to have the full diagnosis. So
and I'm lucky because I was okay from the stroke, but some people aren't. Right? You could die.
Absolutely.
You can lose your life to get a diagnosis before you get the medication you need. I wish that I was put on a baby aspirin at least, or a regular aspirin, or at least I knew enough to. Now I would have taken an aspirin. I don't know if it would have stopped the stroke, but it would have been somewhat of a protection.
Yeah. And before you said that you had triple positivity, meaning anti-beta 2, GP1, anti-cardiolipin, and lupus anticoagulant positive. And still your rheumatologist at that time that told you that you were not yet fully diagnosed as APS. And you mentioned that you maybe should have met an hematologist at that time.
I should have.
How did this happen? Were you referred to an hematologist? Or?
I think it was my mother. She said, this is a blood problem. We need to go to a hematologist too. But it's also autoimmune. So I was on the right track, but they really need to be working together to really, put together all the symptoms. She put me on Plaquenil, hydroxychloroquine, after I had the, she actually gave me a prescription, but I think I had the stroke like within that week. So I had never filled it. That might have been a little of a protected, but really what we need is a blood thinner. So now looking back, I think all of those times I had double vision, I was probably having TIAs, multiple TIAs. Sure. That didn't show up on anything because they don't.
And did you get any brain images at the time that could have diagnosed the TIAs, or they were not even showing up on the
imagery? I don't think so. So I was at the gym and we were cooling down after a class and I felt something in my head where the music started sounding funny that they were playing and the people started looking like they were waving, like they were in a funhouse mirror. And I'm like, something's not right. And then I got a headache and I said, wow, I got to get home. And I drove home and I told my husband. So he gave me like an ice pack and probably like an Advil. And I laid down. I said, okay, maybe I have a migraine. I worked at a hospital at the time. So the next day I went to work and as the day went on, I'm like, I'm not feeling better. I'm feeling a little confused. I told my my nurse manager, whoever, I said, I need to go to the emergency room. I'm not feeling right. So I went down. I told them I have antibodies to indicate I have some type of blood clotting disorder and my symptoms. And I still waited in the emergency room waiting room for probably 3 or 4 hours before they took me in.
Crazy.
And then my mom came and my husband and my dad, and they took me for a CAT scan. They gave me some type of medicine for migraines. I forgot what it was in my IV. And I remember it went straight to my nose, all up in here, like a horrible pain. learning later that if you had a stroke, that medication was contraindicated to give someone.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. So the CAT scan came back with a dark spot. So then they sent me for an MRI, and it was probably 10 o'clock at night when they came back and told me I had a stroke. Then they admitted me.
Oh, my goodness.
For the weekend. I was out by Monday. That was a Friday.
And that's just weird because you were saying that when entering the ER, you told them that you had those criteria, for blood clotting issues, and still they were not going through the way of stroke diagnosis somehow.
No.
Do you feel that probably clinician know-how or knowledge about APS is a bit missing somehow, or?
Yeah, it's definitely missing. I mean, if you go into an emergency room and you're saying you can't breathe, they'll put you right in. But if you're saying your blood's clotting, I don't know if people really understand that blood clot could be in your lungs, it could be in your legs, it could be in your brain, these major, major events that could take your life. And they had me sit there. And then it makes me think, maybe I'm crazy. Maybe there isn't something wrong. Maybe I'm overreacting. Let me go back to work. And I would run up and check my email, because I was like, wow, I'm not doing my duties at work. What if I'm overreacting? But it ended up being something serious, and I stayed out of work for only a week, and I wanted to get back into it. So that's why I say I'm very lucky. I have lost a lot, but it could have been a lot worse as well.
I know. I suppose to conclude, April, what would your message here be to the wider scientific and medical community? Like, what do you want to convey by what you're doing here?
I want to bring awareness of APS. A lot of people, especially women and men too, suffer from multiple losses and multiple problems before they get a diagnosis, and they lose babies that don't need to be lost. They could have life-changing issues. I could have had my speech, my walk. I could have had everything. If I could have died from this diagnosis. I wish that people were more aware, the doctors, that were more aware of what to test for at the first symptom. Maybe start something preventative like aspirin. Maybe look at the criteria. Maybe it doesn't have to be 3 losses
for sure
to diagnose someone, right? I'm on blood thinners for life. I don't drink alcohol. I'm very careful when I do things. I have frequent nosebleeds. I've had internal bleeding. So when I did have my daughter, they give me a C-section so they can monitor the heparin drip. But this is a whole other story.
I know.
I ended up being in the hospital for a month after she was born.
But thanks so much, April, for sharing your story. We know it's a deeply personal story to you, and we're so grateful for you to share it and to share your experience and this, let's say, rough diagnosis road, and now your life living with APS. So thank you.
Definitely, APS awareness is very difficult to broadcast as a message, and let's say it's difficult to end up in clear messaging around APS awareness, and your story is helpful there, I think.
Yes, I'm honored to share it. If I can help one person, it would be worth it.
Thank you so much again, April.
Oh, you're welcome.
We have come to the end of this episode. Thank you all for listening. As usual, all literature sources and links to previous podcasts are listed in the podcast description. Please feel free to send us any questions that you may have at our email address, ask@stago.com, and we'll be glad to answer it in the next episode. To be aware of the next episode, click on the subscription button. It's free. Or follow us on Twitter or LinkedIn. See you next time.
This podcast is brought to you by Stago. Diagnostics is in our blood.